Hey everybody! Today, Rahdo runs through the top 10 worker placement games, or his top 10. And how do you like that? That's a little picture of a worker, going on to a worker placement spot. That's a fine little piece of art there I did up today, special to inspire you with my artistic endeavors there. Okay, so let's get going. Now, this is actually an interesting top 10 to do because worker placement is so ubiquitous. It's such a common game mechanism these days. I mean, it's almost like trying to do a top 10 list of board games that use cardboard. I mean, what's the point? I mean, they all do. So I didn't want to just look at my favorite games of all time and just pull the top 10 that happen to be worker placement and just make a list of that, because that's not really saying anything about worker placement itself. Like Agricola is a wonderful game. It's probably my favorite game of all time. It's always vacillating in the top 3. And it's a worker placement game, so it should be on this list, right? It's not. I did not put it on this list and a bunch of other games beside because it doesn't do anything really interesting or special or creative with worker placement. It's very straightforward. It's very vanilla. What makes Agricola really special is the cards, not the worker placement. And the thematic elements and all the other stuff. I mean, Agricola is a wonderful, wonderful game. But as just based solely on its worker placedness, I wouldn't put it in the top 10 worker placement games of all time. And so I'm going to be running through 10 now. And the reason all of these ones made the list is because they do something really, really interesting. They push worker placement beyond what Kalis gave us or Bus or whatever the original worker placement games might be. And so, without further ado, let's start counting down with number 10, Myrmes. I think that's how you pronounce it. I think this is Latin for ants or something like that. Myrmes. I've done a run through for this. In fact, let's see. I've done run throughs for several of these games, not all of them, but I have done one for this. And now the game itself it's a very, very neat ant colony simulation where you have this board of a backyard or somewhere, and each player controls their own ant colony and sends ants out onto the surface to lay down pheromone trails to pick up food and to deal with bugs and all kinds of stuff. So there's this whole kind of area control thing going on above ground, but below ground everybody has, it's not shown here, but everybody has their own special hive board. Let's see if I can pull one out. They have their own special hive board. And now this is a worker placement board, where, you have workers, which are your worker ants, and you can put them in different areas to activate certain abilities, grow more particular types of ants, get resources, whatever. It's pretty straightforward, but what's interesting about this game, and what I think this game adds really to the notion of the worker placement genre as a whole, is the notion that okay, yeah, my workers are great. They're very, very powerful. They are the core of everything I do. But if I want, I can sacrifice workers permanently to get some other benefit. And in this game, if you want, at any given time, you can sacrifice your workers to basically, this is the German manual, but to get bonuses, or basically to shoot for in-game bonuses. There's a bunch, every time you play the game, there's going to be different in-game scoring opportunities depending on what random objective tiles got drawn in the game you're playing. But to activate those, you have to sacrifice your workers. You have to take your worker, put it on one of those tiles, and then lose it for the rest of the game. And when you do that is a very, very challenging, tense decision to make, because you want to get there first. You want to grab that bonus thing before somebody else does. But if you do it earlier in the game, you're really crippling yourself because you have less of a workforce to actually get done when you need to get done. I think that's brilliant. I mean, the game itself is a really, really good game for a lot of reasons. You can watch my older run-through that I did for it. But I think that's a very, very cool notion that I'd love to see more of in worker placement games. The notion of, it's very, very common. Agricola, again, has the notion of get more workers, get a bigger workforce. But the notion of flipping that script and saying, no, I'm going to weed away my workforce. I'm going to sacrifice it over time to give me some particular benefit is a big, big deal. There's another game I could have mentioned for this. I could have just as easily mentioned Key Market in this number 10 spot, because it does the same thing. This is a worker placement game where you're placing workers out on fields to generate goods, but anytime you want, you can pull those workers out of the fields and permanently assign them to guilds, which will give you special abilities. It's the same idea. But I'm going to officially go with Myrmes instead of Key Market, because Key Market has been out of print for a while and it's impossible to get your hands on. So, number 10, with the notion of sacrificing workers to get bigger rewards and knowing when is the best time to do it, is Myrmes. Okay, number 9. This is a game I just did a run through for just a few weeks ago. Wonderful little 2-player only game. That's a rarity in and of itself. A game that is designed from the ground up for 2 players. And on top of it, this is a worker placement game. What is it? Targi. Now this is an awesome worker placement game. And the trick, the interesting thing about it is, it's a board game, but really the board is made up of a bunch of cards. I would still consider this a board game though. And so every time you play the game, you're going to have a different collection of cards here in the center that represent different opportunities for your desert nomadic tribe to get resources and convert resources into expanding your tribe and stuff like that. But what's interesting is you don't place your workers on these spots to do these actions. You place them on the outer edge of the board. And so what will happen is, you can see in this picture right here, the blue player has placed a worker here and a worker here. So that means the blue player got this bonus and this bonus in regular worker placement style. Hey, I put my worker here, that blocks everybody else, they can't get to it, I get that bonus. But what happens is these two triangulate out here into the world, and the blue player ended up getting this element, this item, whatever it is, recruiting this tribe as well. And that becomes so incredibly cool, this notion that you're very limited and restricted to where you can place your workers. But not only are you trying to place your workers bearing in mind what it is you want to grab that are on the corners, because a lot of cool special actions are on these outside spaces, but that also, once you've put one there, you've pretty much opened, not only have you blocked this one particular space from your opponent, you've blocked this entire row. Because your opponent cannot put a worker opposite yours. So if blue put one here, white could not put one here. So blue has blocked off this whole row. And that's an incredibly powerful thing. The notion that you're not just blocking this one space, you're blocking a quarter or a fifth of the entire board with one worker placement space. And the way, and so people can see that, and so, okay, well, I blocked that, well, white puts their thing over here, and that blocks this entire, or, I blocked that column, then white blocks this entire row, and the thing I wanted, where I was going to triangulate right to here, is suddenly denied me. This game is really clever, really smart, a wonderful 2-player game, and really turns worker placement on its head, because every worker placement you make in this game has so much more weight and so much more decision making going on, because you're not just choosing one space, you're choosing a whole bunch of spaces all at once. So anyway, so that is number 9, Targi. On to number 8, a unfortunately much maligned game amongst certain quarters because it's considered to be too dry, I suppose. But Jen and I, we like it a lot. Vasco da Gama. And now, yeah, this is, a straight up, era of colonization, Euro game where players are, European powers sending ships off to the Far East to, to get trade goods and bring them back and score victory points and all that. And basically, the main thing you're really focusing on in this game is building up your fleet and then shipping it off to be able to get to the Far East and be the first to grab all the really good stuff. It's a really nice game. It's really solid. The theme's well integrated. There's historical characters and whatnot that you engage their help through the act of worker placement, because the first half of every round is, okay, we're going to place all our workers back home so we can do the actions we need to do, and then our ships will go off. So what's interesting about the worker placement in this game, though, is it has this kind of push your luck element to it, because what happens is there's this this grid of 20 tokens, whatever, I don't know what you'd want to call them, numbered 1 through 20. And what happens is, before the worker placement begins, a chit is revealed that says what would you call it, the safe number is. And in this case, the number that was revealed is, I don't know if you're going to focus on there, is an 11. Now what that means is, on this board, whenever you place a worker in all the different places you could go, you assign a number to that worker based on the spaces that are still available. And so say it was number 11. What that means is, if I choose number 6, if I put a worker over on this dude and put the number 6 with him, that means that's potentially the lower the number you choose, the sooner you will be able to do that action. And this is a game that's all about being in the right place at the right time and getting those resources first. That's a core element of worker placement. Get onto the board before anybody else does. But you don't place your workers in a preset manner. Because I chose number 6 and put it on this guy, it could potentially be the 6th worker if somebody else chose numbers 1 through 5. But here's the thing. Because the number, the target number, the lucky number revealed was 11, That means if I chose 6, I will have to pay $5. The difference between 11 and 6, I'd have to pay $5 to go there first. And okay, so that's pretty simple. It's just, the sooner you want to go, the more you have to pay. But here's the tricky thing. After we placed all of our workers in all the different spots, we then reveal the other tile. And this other tile will either say, anywhere from -3 to +3. And what that will do is that will modify the original number. So if the original number was 11, and I chose 6, and then was it a -3 came up, it'll go from 11 to 10, 9, 8. And then all of a sudden, my gamble paid off. I was going to have to pay $5. That was going to be really, really expensive for me to do it. But because we moved from an 11 to 10, 9, 8, now it's 8 minus 6. I only have to pay $2 because fortune went my way. But on the flip side, it could have gone the other way. It could have switched from an 11 to a 12 or a 13 or a 14. And that would add even more money to how much I'd have to spend. And I might not be able to afford to do the action anymore because it became more expensive. And so that's the interesting thing. When people are, trying to do their worker placement, they're literally gambling. They're pushing their luck because, if they have the target number of 10, well, sure, okay, well, I know if I do a 10, it's not going to cost me anything, but maybe it'll cost me more. I know for a fact if I choose 14, it will never cost me anything to do that action, other than whatever the action itself is. I'll be able to pay that action because the worst, that 10 could turn into a 13, and therefore my 14 is totally safe. But gosh, if I choose 14 out of 20, everybody's going to get to go before I do, and I'll miss all the good stuff. So you want to push your luck. And if it's a 10, okay, well, maybe I'll go for a 9. And then somebody else goes for an 8. And then somebody else goes for a 7. And pretty soon, everybody's like pushing their luck on the wrong side. And then you eventually reveal the tile and find out if everybody has to pay through the nose or not. It turns what would otherwise be, very straightforward worker placement stuff, the kind of thing you see in plenty of games, into a very, very tense competition. And it's a simple little rule, but it's so exciting to reveal. It adds that element of chance and daring and risk taking into worker placement, which is something that worker placement is not really known for. And I think that's what makes Vasco da Gama a very, very cool special game, and that's why it is number 8. Okay, moving on to number 7, Euphoria. Build a better dystopia. Now, there's actually a few different things I could actually mention that this game does with worker placement that's absolutely amazing. I mean, this game does a lot of really cool ideas. The workers in this game are actually dice that you roll. And these dice represent your workforce, not surprisingly, in this far Brave New World-inspired dystopic future where everybody are just like menial drones who, pursue simple pleasures and forego their personal freedoms. And in this world, I am controlling all these workers and trying to keep them stupid, keep them drugged up and happy so they'll do what I want. Because if I roll the dice and the numbers are too high, the higher a number is when I roll my worker die, that represents how smart they are. And the smarter they are, the more likely they are to rebel. So I want dumb workers. But the problem is, dumb workers can't produce as much for me. So I want smart workers to produce more, but I want dumb workers so they won't run away and rebel. And that's cool. But that's not what makes this game neat. That's not why I put this on the list. Or at the very least, it's one of the reasons. What's really, really interesting, and there's a few other games that do this. The first one I can really think of is Le Havre, is the notion that once you put your worker on the board, it's not a case where everybody puts their workers on the board, they do all their actions, and then at the end of the round, everybody takes their workers off, and then next month you do the same thing. That's not what happens in this game. Once I put my worker on the board, he will stay there forever, until I actually waste an action. I take time to pull him off the board. And so that creates a very, very interesting arrhythmia, I guess, for lack of a better term, to the standard worker placement groove that you get into of I place all my workers, do the actions, and then we replace them. Here, I might place a worker down and he might stay on the board quite a while. Because the other element is what a standard core conceit of worker placement. It's not always the case, but it's generally considered to be a core element of worker placement is if I put my worker into a spot before you do, that means I have blocked you and you can't get in there. Now sometimes games say, oh, well, you can still get in there, but it'll cost you extra. Sometimes games like, which one did I just mention, Myrmes, you don't have to worry about that because, hey, I only block myself because I have my own personal worker board, but whatever. In this game, no one can block anyone, because if I go to the generator where I send my worker over to the generator so they can generate power for me that I need to pursue whatever my agenda is. There's little electricity tokens. If I send them, if I send them to the tunnel to start digging a tunnel from the Euphoria city to the underground because the Euphorians are trying to steal from the subterraneans. I put him in this little worker space. I pay my resource to have the benefit of doing it, and then I get a response. Now, I leave him there. And you'd think, oh, that means nobody else can go there. It's blocked, but that's not the case. Anybody can go there. And what happens is, if somebody else sends their worker there, they bump my worker out. They force him out. And you might think that's a bad thing because, hey, yeah, I'm getting kicked around by the opponents. But no, it's a good thing, because that means I have retrieved that worker into my workforce, and I now don't have to waste an entire turn pulling him off the board. Somebody else pulled him off the board for me. And then that becomes a core central element of this entire game that makes it really, really unique. Because what happens is, it's in worker placement games, it's a very, very common move. Okay, well, I need this. I don't need this as much, but I know my opponent needs it, so I'll put my worker there so that they can't get whatever the resource is. In this game, it flips it on its head. I can see that somebody is already blocking the space that I am at, and I really need to take that resource, but I'm not going to. I could do it. It's mine for the taking. But if I do, I will help my opponent by giving them their worker back. And so they are it's almost kind of like a passive-aggressive blocking me. Sure, yeah, go on ahead. Bump me out. You'll be helping me. You'll be giving me a new worker if you do that and saving me the trouble of having to waste a turn. That, I think, is what makes this game really, really special. That notion of worker placement where nobody can block anybody, and instead of me actively denying you something, I kind of passively deny you something, because you have to make the decision. If you want to go for the thing that I'm at, are you going to help me to help yourself? And that is really, really cool. Very, very unique. I can't really think of any other game that does that, although maybe somebody can point me out if I've done it, if I've got it wrong. But what an excellent, excellent idea. Now, Euphoria is full of very, very cool, experimental, far out, imaginative and creative gameplay notions like that. But it's that notion, the worker bump, more than anything else, that puts Euphoria in my top 10 worker placement games of all time. All right, so that was number 6. On to number 5. And now this one's actually a little bit embarrassing because I have to admit I do not own the game. I have owned it in the past, and I did a run through for it. And after I did that, I traded it away. Not because it's not an amazing worker placement game. It is. I raved about the worker placement in this game. I traded it away because at the end of the day, I didn't think it was as strong as a two-player game as it should be, because of the way it tried to scale the board and the way it does competition on certain tracks. I just didn't feel it was as good a two-player game as it was a 3 or 4. So I don't own the game anymore, but I still will happily put it at number 5 on my list of the best worker placement games out there, because Archon, Glory and Machination did something very, very cool with worker placement game. Revolutionary. Now, I don't have Archon worker placement. I have its prequel game, Shadows over the Empire. I'll point this out because Archon is set in this same world, this cogwork world of mannequin robots and clockwork cities as they go around doing their business. But I won't keep the box on board, because Archon, Glory and Machination, the unofficial sequel to this game, is a worker placement game where your workers have kind of secret identities, sort of. Because what happens is all your workers are just regular little pawns. You put them out on the board, there's nothing special about that at all. But you also have a hand of cards in your hand as well. And nobody in any given time knows what cards are in your hand, because everybody does a secret draw from their deck at the beginning of a round. So nobody knows exactly what the cards are. But when I put a worker onto the board, I play a worker card along with it that defines what that worker is. Whether he's just a regular schlub, or whether he's like a member of the clergy, or whether he's an engineer, or whatever it might be. And depending on what card I play, that gives that worker special abilities. That they can generate more goods than they normally would, or they can do a bunch of different things depending on what it is. And so when everybody starts a round of worker placement, and the worker placement is very normal. We all take our turns doing our worker placement. We all take our workers back off the board, and then we continue. The main structure of the game is normal, but what's abnormal, what's special is people know how many workers I've got. they might have a pretty good idea of what it is I'm after and whether they need to get someplace before I get someplace. But what they don't know is, what can my workers actually do? Do I have the worker in hand that allows me to go someplace that somebody already is, so my workers can't be blocked? Or do I have the worker that can force the tax collector worker? If I put this worker down and, but he's a tax collector and takes money from everybody else who goes to that spot, suddenly, worker placement blossoms into this amazing game of bluffing and counter bluffing and wondering, what do they have in their hand? Because you know that in a previous turn, they have, basically everybody's workers start out as schlubs who don't have any special abilities. And over the course of the game, players basically get new cards they can add to their deck of worker types. So you know the types of workers somebody has hired before, but you don't know if they've got them in their hand right now or not. Or are they going to use them in the next round? It's a very, very clever game. It really fundamentally changes the feel of worker placement without actually changing any of the core fundamentals of worker placement. I think it's brilliant for that. It's just such a shame it wasn't as good a 2-player game as it should have been. It was definitely a good 3-4 player game, but as 2-player it lost something, so that's why I don't have it. But I still strongly recommend, if you're a big fan of worker placement and want to see something cool, Archon, Glory, and Machination. Anyway, for the remainder, I do actually have the boxes because these are all excellent 2-player games. So let's move on to the next one, number 4, 3. Actually, let's say I've done 10, 9, 8, 7, 6. Oh, I'm sorry, Glory Machination was number 6. Now we move on to number 5, Madeira. Now, this is a very, very cool game. I've done a run through for it as well. This is another one of these games where your workers are dice. And the value of the dice in this game kind of restricts what areas you can place your workers in. Because if they're special dice, they only have 1, 2s, and 3s on them. And if I roll a 1, I can only put them in region 1. But if I roll a 3, he's implicitly more powerful because I can put him in regions 1, 2, or 3. Then that's cool. That's nice. A little bit of excitement. What kind of works am I going to get when I roll? Where will I be able to place them? But that's not what makes this game cool. What makes this game cool, and this is the next few games, this one and the next 2, all of them have the notion of, when I'm placing my worker on the board, I'm doing more than just getting an action. The conceit of me putting this worker to work means several things, not just one thing. But they all do it in very, very different ways. So I'll talk about Madeira first. When I put that worker on the board, to go visit this dude, whoever he might be, and there's a bunch of different guys I could go, and the board gets randomized every time, so you never really know, which guys you can go, where they are, and where you'll be able to go. But if I go to this guy, he'll give me a benefit immediately, just like any worker placement game, right? I put my worker on there, boom, I get a benefit. But now here's the interesting thing. All these guys have 2 benefits that they can give you. The one they give you instantly, and then the one they will give you later on at the end of the round if you pay them. Because I've set my worker here, this guy will get to work on whatever I asked him for, but he expects to be paid later on. And now this game money is incredibly tight. And what will often happen is you'll send your workers all over the place, and you'll get, you'll enter into contracts with these guys. And you'll put your worker, they'll do the work for you, he'll do the work for you, he'll do the work for you, and then later on at the end of the round, when it comes time to pay, you don't have enough money to pay all these dudes. And so what'll happen is, when it gets to this guy, you'll have to decide, well, am I going to pay him, or am I going to welch? Am I going to back out? Am I going to stiff him? Am I going to leave him high and dry? Am I not going to cover the bill, etc., etc.? And that's a really, really cool choice, because if I don't, well, then I will basically I'll suffer a minor inconsequential penalty that I can get rid of later without too terribly much trouble. So it doesn't really hurt me very much if I don't pay him. But if that happens, because this is a game where multiple people could come visit this guy. So if I went and visited him, and then Jen went and visited him, and then you went and visited him, and then we get to paying him. If I don't pay him, suddenly, I won't get the benefit of whatever his second action would be. So I'm giving up a little bit of something, but I don't pay him. But then what happens is, he is now going to charge everybody else, you and Jen, more because I stiffed him. So now he's going to overcharge you to make up for it. And then suddenly, The worker placement in this game becomes a very, very tense, high-stakes game of anticipating what your opponent's going to do. Is your opponent, when they go here, are they going to pay the guy at the end of the month to get the special bonus? Do they need that special bonus? Or are they going to stiff him? Because if they stiff him, I don't want to go there because I don't want to get left holding the bill. That is an amazing concept that, I haven't really seen anywhere else. This notion that worker placement has an immediate benefit and then a long-term benefit that you could back out on, but failing to pay out for your long-term benefit has a huge impact on everybody else who might have gone for that benefit. So cool, so clever. Now this game has a lot more going on. I mean, this is one of the heaviest games we own. There's a million things going on. You can see just from the board. It's incredibly complicated. So you can watch the run through and see more. But still, that one element of that turns worker placement on its head is what puts Madeira at number 5 on this list. Moving on to number 4, continuing that theme of when you put a worker on the board, you've done more than just collect some resources. Is number 4, Bruxelles 1893. This was a pretty good year for really cool worker placement. You got your Madeira, you got your Targi, you got your Bruxelles, although to be fair, Targi actually came out the previous year in Germany. So anyway, sorry, totally aside. Bruxelles, I've done a run through for this one as well. In fact, I've done a run through for every single one that I've talked about so far except for Vasco da Gama. Is that right? And I have done a run through for so the only game on this list that I haven't done a run through for is Vasco. But anyway, Bruxelles. Now, this is a worker placement game where you have this randomly generated worker placement board where you can put your workers in all kinds of different spots. And there's a bunch of cool stuff about this game. The board itself, every round, before players get to put their workers down, there's going to be this little angle thing, this frame that defines, because it went into this spot like this, all of these worker placement spaces are gone. So before you even start placing your workers, the board itself fundamentally changes what you can do every time. So that's cool, but that's not what makes this game special from worker placement. Because what happens is, when the red player put his worker on this spot, he did several things. One, he just went here so he could do whatever that action was. Whether it was, spend a night at the opera to influence rich people of society, whether it was collecting resources. So because in this game we're all Art Nouveau. Is it Art Nouveau? Yeah, Art Nouveau architects in Brussels in the late early 1900s. And so we're trying to gather resources and to complete our masterworks and make paintings and sell them to make money, and there's a bunch of different actions we can do here. And so if I go there, of course, I'm going to do that action. Now that's the standard worker placement, and that's where the standard stops, because there's other stuff happening here too. In addition to putting my worker down, I also have to put some money down there as well. And that represents me paying for the action I'm trying to do. But how much money I pay is entirely up to me. There's no set number. I could pay 1, 2, 3. I have to pay something, but I could just pay 1 and not pay very much, or I could pay a lot. Now here's why you're doing that. Because at the bottom of all these worker placement spaces are a bunch of cards that will get handed out at the end of the worker placement round, at the end of the round. And they'll be handed out based on whoever put the most money in their column. So as you can see, like in this picture right here, the yellow player has done a worker placement action right here, and he put 2 coins. Let's assume that's $2. And the red player has put a coin over here. Let's assume that's $1. So if the round ended right now, because the yellow player in this column spent $2 and the red player spent 1, the yellow player won the bidding. So not only when you put a worker down are you actually doing worker placement, but you're also engaging in an auction. But you're not done yet. There's a third thing you're doing, because in addition to worker placement and auction bidding, this is also an area control game. Because if you can, you want to try, at the intersection, at every one of these intersections in the worker placement board, there's one of these. This triggers an extra bonus action you can do at the end of the round, extra scoring opportunities. And the person who gets it is the person who has the majority of workers surrounding it. So you can see right here, this space, there's a yellow guy, and a red guy. If a red player were to put a worker here, then yellow and red would be tied for this. But if yellow or blue or some other player put a space here, then yellow would take the lead, and they would be the one who gets the bonus from this space. So every worker you place on this board, you are trying to keep in mind and accomplish 3 activities. The worker placement to get the item you needed, the bidding to get the bonus you needed, and the area control to get the extra score you need. It's incredible. This game is amazing. It totally came out of nowhere and blew me away. I mean, I'd heard it was really, really cool, but this game is incredible. One of the best games, I'm pretty sure. Yeah, I'll come back to a top 10 for 2013 later. Amazing game, really, really cool. What it does with worker placement is unsurpassed. I mean, what else game does that where every worker you place, 3 completely different games are being played with every worker placement you make? Amazing. Okay, now we're getting down to, now that was tough to beat, but let's see what we get next. Now this is another game. This is the last of the games where the worker placement, your workers are so much more than just simple workers. In Madeira, there's the notion that your workers could basically get additional actions, or they could steal to screw your opponents and stuff like that. In Brussels, your workers are actually engaging in 3 different games all at once. Keyflower, my number 3, is another one of these games where workers are more than just workers. And this is a game that is all about building your own little kingdom in the new world, because every round there is going to be a bunch of tiles put out on an auction block, and everybody is bidding to get these tiles. But you don't bid with money in this game, you bid with your workers, because you have a big handful of workers. And with every one of those workers, there's one of 2 things you can do with them. You can put them on a tile to generate the resource it does. You can put them on the lumber mill to get some lumber. Very, very simple. You can put them on the mine to get some ore. Very, very simple stuff. Or you could put your worker next to the tile, and that represents you making a bid for that tile, because you are giving up, you are sacrificing your workers to your workforce to be able to get the tile, so that in later rounds the tile will be all yours. Because when they're out here in the middle, anybody could go to these things. Now actually I should say there's more to it than that. I'm oversimplifying, but just that core element of, what do I do with my workers? Am I going to use them? I need my workforce to actually get the goods I need to generate a prosperous village and all that stuff, so I can score points at the end of the game based on my secret objectives. But I also need to bid higher and higher and higher so I can get these tiles, because if I don't get the tiles, then I won't score the bonus. So that fundamental, but it doesn't stop there, because here's the other interesting thing. As you can see, there's an example from one player's perspective. Every player has workers of several different colors. And these kind of represent different nationalities that have all come to the new worlds. And these nationalities don't necessarily work well together. And so what will happen is, if I try to bid on this tile, or this tile out here in the middle of the board, that's really weird. This board is set up wrong. Okay, well, this is kind of a bad picture. You can watch my run through to get a better understanding. But say, this tile is hotly in contention. What happens is somebody, and now you should imagine this is like the green. This is literally a mistake. Somebody didn't understand how to play the game when they set this picture up. Green might have bid 1. Let's say that's a single green meeple there. They're giving up a worker to try and own this tile. But then yellow bid 2. And now green has a choice. Of course. Durr. It's funny, I've done 2 runs through this game. This game is so rich and so complex. Every time I run through, I make a goof. I forget one thing. And actually, I've totally gotten myself screwed up. The colors do not represent players. That's the thing you have to get your head around. What this represents is the position. Some player wanted this tile. The player who is logistically sitting in this corner of the table. So he put a worker on the spot closest to him. But then somebody else who is sitting over here put this worker here to indicate they've raised him. But here's the thing. Because the first player bid yellow, all other players have to bid yellow as well. Because once the yellows, and say the yellow represent the Frenchmen, once the yellows went there, Englishmen or Germans or whatever will not go to that tile. So, in your little secret, if you happen to have a lot of blues but not a lot of reds, that red can be you might want to think of it in terms of those reds as, well, you know what, those reds, I'm not going to be able to bid very high with them, so I'll use them as my actual workforce this turn. That notion of color combinations combined with deciding whether your workers are actual workers in a work placement game or whether they are currency in an auction game is amazing. Keyflower was my best game of 2012. I think it was our number 1 favorite game of all time, and that's the reason why. Because it fundamentally changed the rules for what a worker placement game is, and that's why it's absolutely amazing, and that's why it's number 3 on my worker placement top 10. And every time I talk about Keyflower, I mess something up. Sorry about that, folks. But anyway, moving on to number 2, Tzolkin. the Mayan calendar. Now this is a very, very cool game too. I've done a run through for it also. And you might have heard this game. This is the game with the big gears. The board itself has a series of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 big interlocking gears. And every round, this big central one is going to get turned one space, which in turn, because they're all connected, turns all the other gears. It's neat. It's a fun, cool mechanical gizmo that just draws you to the board and makes you want to play, but it's also instrumental to gameplay because this is a worker placement game where you put your workers on the spaces on these little gears. And you can see, I can zoom in really close, every spoke of these gears points to a different action that your worker could do. So what happens is, and the giving a round, you'll put your worker on this first space, and then on the next round the big gear will turn, which will make the little gear turn, and so he's moved from this action to this action. And then that your worker will stay on the gear forever. And what that represents is him doing more and more work. So you might leave him on this gear for 2, 3, 4 rounds until he finally makes it over here, and then that's when you pull him off, and that means he does that action. And so by using these gears, using this mechanical gizmo jalopy of a board, what Tzolkin adds to the notion of worker placement is time as a dimension, is a temporal factor. That you put your workers on the board, and the longer they work, the more they will produce for you. And that is so awesome. Other worker placement games don't really do that. You put your worker, you take him off, it's a fixed, finite thing you get every turn, but that doesn't represent the reality of doing work. The reality is you put somebody to work, there's a lot of things they could do, but there's things they could do very quickly, or there's things that could take them a long time. Tzolkin mimics that kind of real-world workforce element in a brilliant way that also, as an offshoot, just happens to be a very, very cool, fun, funky gizmo of a board. That's why it makes number 2. It's an incredible game. And I'm going to leave it right there. You can check out the run-through for more. I've done a run-through for it and for its expansion, which is also very, very good. But now, I'm going to go to the final. And, I own 2 games that I could use as an example for what they add to worker placement, because both these games do it very well. They're 2 of our absolute favorites. Jen and I both love these games a lot. And I'm feeling kind of cheesy, and maybe I'm going to cop out and not pick one over the other, because they both do a slight variation of this core addition to the worker placement mechanism. They have a different take on it, but it's still the same core element. Now, what that core element is, and then you see if you can guess what the game's is the notion that everybody places their workers simultaneously. You do not okay, well, I put my worker there, and you blocked me, I'll put one over here, and then, I'll put him over there, I better get over there. None of that. In this game, everybody in secret assigns their workers and then reveals them all at the same time, and then we see what the fallout is like, and did I actually get the action I wanted? So what are the games? Well, there's actually a few different games that do this, but these are Jen's and my 2 favorites. Fresco and Dungeon Petz. So I'm going to cheat and say these guys are tied for #1 worker placement game of all time, because in both of these games you actually have a player screen and you are placing your workers onto your own little board and defining what your workforce is going to do this round. That's what Fresco does, and Dungeon Petz, Steve shows a picture of it, does the exact same thing. You place your workers on this space and your board can kind of flip up and then you reveal at the same time. Both these games are all about planning ahead of time. Right, okay, I know this round I need to do this and this and this. Okay, so I should really put my workers over here and here and here. But what if Jen wants to do it even more, and then I lose my chance to do it? Well, maybe I should put a worker over here. And you make all these decisions taking into account what you think your opponent's going to do. And they're doing the same thing, trying to second guess what you're going to do. And then everybody reveals all at once, and then you look and say, oh my God, you didn't put any workers there, I could have had it all. And that happens all the time. Now, they have a slightly different variance of how it works. In Fresco, you're actually placing your workers in the 5 different areas, the 5 different things: going to the market to get goods, going to the chapel to actually paint the fresco ceiling, going to the workshop to mix paints to get new colors and all that. And the number of workers you put indicates the number of actions you can do in that given area. So it's very simple, very straightforward. This is the lighter of these 2. Dungeon Petz does the same thing, sort of. You are, and again, I've done run-throughs for both of these things. You are, in this game, you're setting up kind of, you have a family of imps, a whole bunch of imps. They're little workers. You put them in these spots, and but you group them. You might have a group of 3 imps, and a group of 2 imps, and a group of 1 imp by himself. But that 1 imp might have, you might give him a gold piece, or you might not. And so you end up creating, and all of these individual groups are shoppers that will go out independently into town, which is the main board, and buy stuff. So when you're actually setting up what you're going to do, you're actually accomplishing 2 things. You're creating groups that are capable, because there are certain restrictions on the different areas you can go to. Some of them need to have like 2 guys in a group. Some of them need to have money. Some of them don't have anything. You just got to get there first. So you're setting up. You're coordinating your group so they can do whatever they need in town, but you're also bearing in mind that the bigger the group is, the sooner they get to go. So you are also effectively in the dark, totally guesswork, trying to guess what your opponent is doing. You're also determining turn order. So you might, and those 2 things combined makes it an incredibly fulfilling. And then once you've done it, and everybody reveals, effectively turn orders revealed, and I put all my eggs in one basket, and yay, I got to go first. But then I can see, wow, I'm not going to get to make another turn for like 3 rounds because everybody else is going to do a bunch of stuff before I get to go again. But I got that one thing I really needed that was so important, that was crucial. So it's an incredibly cool game, and that moment in both of these games, the moment of revelation, when people reveal how they have placed their workers in their own little secret thing, and they reveal, and then everybody looks at, okay, what did you do, what did you do? Oh my gosh, I can't believe you did that. I didn't think you were going to do that in a million years. It's so much fun. There's so much drama. There's so much excitement. There's so much anticipation. When you're still working in the dark, you're like, you curl yourself up into a ball. Oh, but it could be this or this. And that is a delicious, exquisite tension that both of these games create, because they take regular worker placement, but introduce the notion of everybody placing workers at the same time, which is awesome. Okay, folks, so that was it. That was top 10, although I cheated and said 11. Top 10 games that really do something really cool and interesting and unique. If I were to mention another one, I'd probably also talk about Manhattan Project. I almost put it on the list because it kind of shares with Archon and Euphoria, doing these really, really cool worker placement. Manhattan Project just barely missed the list because there were other games that did what it does. That, well, anyway. So that's it, folks. Thanks for watching. I'll be doing some more top 10s in the future. I forget what the next one is. Based on voters. But otherwise, I hope you have a very, very nice day. And in thematic keeping with this, I suggest you get to work. Okay, thanks for watching, everybody. Talk to you later. Okay, bye-bye.